You think Black Christmas dinners in the 1960s were about store-bought shortcuts? Think again. These resourceful mothers stretched every dollar, transforming humble ingredients into holiday feasts that kept families together and traditions alive. Let's dig into 30 cheap Christmas meals Black mothers made in the 1960s. Chitlins with hot sauce carried a power that went far beyond the dinner table. They announced that Christmas had truly arrived in Black households across the South. These pig intestines required hours of meticulous cleaning, soaking, and scrubbing before they could even touch a pot. And the women who prepared them understood this labor as an act of love passed down through generations. The cleaning process alone could take an entire morning, with mothers and grandmothers working side by side in kitchens that filled with the unmistakable aroma that divided families into those who craved them and those who fled. Once cleaned, the chitlins were boiled for hours with onions, garlic, bay leaves, and vinegar until they became tender and rich. Served with a generous splash of hot sauce and cornbread, they represented the waste-nothing philosophy that kept Black families fed when money was scarce. At around 15 cents a pound in 1965, chitlins made Christmas dinner possible for families who couldn't afford turkey or ham. Baked ham with pineapple rings was the showstopper that anchored Christmas tables when Black mothers could scrape together enough for something special. These weren't the spiral-cut hams of modern grocery stores, but bone-in hams that required real skill to prepare, scoring the fat in diamond patterns, studding each intersection with whole cloves, and basting repeatedly with a glaze made from brown sugar, mustard, and pineapple juice. Canned pineapple rings were arranged across the top, each one secured with a toothpick and a bright red maraschino cherry at its center. The ham would roast slowly in the oven, filling the entire house with a sweetness that drew children from every corner. A 10-pound ham could cost around $5 in 1965, which represented a significant investment for most working families, but it stretched across multiple meals and fed crowds of relatives who gathered for the holiday. The leftovers became sandwiches, ham salad, and flavoring for beans throughout the following week. Candied yams were the jewels of the Christmas table, glistening with caramelized sugar and butter in baking dishes that had seen decades of holiday meals. Black mothers would peel and slice sweet potatoes thick, layering them in buttered pans with brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and generous pats of butter between each layer. Some added a splash of orange juice or vanilla extract, while others stirred in a bit of molasses for deeper color and flavor. The dish baked until the potatoes softened and the sugar melted into a thick syrup that pooled around the edges. Marshmallows were sometimes added in the final minutes, puffing and browning into sweet clouds that children fought over. Sweet potatoes cost only pennies a pound in the 1960s, making this dish an affordable luxury that felt far more extravagant than its price suggested. Every spoonful carried the warmth of tradition, connecting families to generations of women who had perfected this recipe long before them. Collard greens with smoked neckbones simmered on stovetops throughout Black neighborhoods as Christmas approached, their rich aroma drifting through windows, across front porches. The greens required careful preparation. Each leaf had to be washed multiple times to remove grit, stripped of tough stems, and torn into manageable pieces. Smoked neckbones were added to large pots of water along with onions, garlic, vinegar, and red pepper flakes, creating a broth that would infuse the greens with smoky depth. The pot would simmer for hours until the greens turned silky and dark, swimming in potlikker that elders sipped like medicine. Neckbones cost almost nothing at the butcher counter, often given away or sold for a few cents a pound, yet they transformed simple greens into something approaching luxury. Cornbread was mandatory alongside, used to soak up every drop of the precious cooking liquid. This dish represented prosperity for the coming year, the greens symbolizing money and the long cooking time symbolizing patience and care. Cornbread dressing was the dish that separated Christmas from ordinary Sundays, built from cornbread that mothers baked specifically to crumble and dry for the occasion. The preparation began days before the holiday, with pans of cornbread cooling on counters and sometimes white bread added for texture. The dried bread was crumbled into large bowls, then mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and bell peppers, all bound together with broth and beaten eggs. Sage, thyme, and black pepper provided seasoning, though every family guarded their particular combination as sacred. Some added boiled eggs chopped throughout, others folded in giblets that had simmered until tender. The mixture was poured into cast-iron skillets and baked until golden on top with a moist, custardy interior. Dressing was never called stuffing in most Black households. It was baked separately, developing a crust that stuffing could never achieve. At nearly zero cost beyond the cornmeal and vegetables, this dish proved that skill mattered more than expensive ingredients. Oxtail stew was the kind of Christmas dish that rewarded patience, transforming one of the cheapest cuts at the butcher counter into something approaching restaurant elegance. These bony tail sections were first browned in hot oil until deeply caramelized, then braised slowly with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and herbs until the meat became impossibly tender. The collagen from the bones melted into the cooking liquid, creating a naturally thick, glossy gravy that clung to every piece of meat. By 1965, oxtails could be purchased for as little as 25 cents a pound, a price that reflected their status as throwaway cuts that few outside Black and Caribbean communities bothered to cook. The stew would simmer for 3 to 4 hours, filling kitchens with a richness that belied its humble origins. Served over rice or with fresh bread to soak up the gravy, oxtail stew could feed a large family from a single pot. Children learned to work every bit of meat from the small bones, understanding that this dish taught respect for food. Smothered pork chops represented the kind of everyday made special cooking that Black mothers elevated for Christmas tables across the country. Bone-in pork chops were seasoned generously with salt, pepper, paprika, and garlic powder, then dredged in flour and fried until golden in a cast-iron skillet that had likely belonged to someone's grandmother. Once browned, the chops were removed while sliced onions and bell peppers were added to the same pan, cooking until soft in the rendered pork fat. Broth was poured in to deglaze the pan, scraping up all the flavorful fond before the chops returned to simmer in the gravy. The smothering process could take an hour or more, allowing the meat to become fork tender while the gravy thickened into velvet. Pork chops cost around 40 cents a pound in the mid-1960s, making them affordable for holiday splurging. Served over rice with the onion gravy ladled generously on top, this dish proved that slow cooking could transform cheap cuts into pure comfort. Sweet potato pie held a place of honor that no store-bought dessert could ever claim, baked in kitchens where recipes existed only in the memories of the women who made them. The sweet potatoes were roasted until soft, then peeled and mashed smooth with butter, sugar, eggs, and warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes ginger. Evaporated milk was added to create a silky filling that would set into custard during baking, while a splash of vanilla rounded out the flavors. The crust might be homemade from flour and lard or purchased if time was short, but the filling always came from scratch. Sweet potato pie was never confused with pumpkin pie in Black households. The two were entirely different traditions, with sweet potato carrying deeper flavor and richer history. One pie could be made for less than $1, yet it commanded the respect reserved for the finest desserts. The first slice always went to the eldest family member, and no one dared cut into the pie before the matriarch gave approval. Hog maw was Christmas morning tradition in many Black households, where the cleaned and stuffed pig stomach became a one-pot feast that carried families through the entire day. The stomach was scrubbed and cleaned meticulously, then filled with a mixture of cubed potatoes, sausage, onions, cabbage, and seasonings before being sewn shut. The stuffed maw was roasted or boiled until the outer casing became tender and the filling cooked through, absorbing all the flavors of the pork. Some families added their own signature ingredients, hot peppers, celery, or carrots according to preference. The finished dish was sliced into thick rounds that revealed the colorful filling within, each slice containing a perfect portion of meat and vegetables. At prices that barely registered at the butcher counter, often as low as 10 cents a pound, hog maw represented the ultimate in economical cooking. This dish connected families to ancestors who had survived on similar preparations, turning discarded parts into sustenance and celebration. Neck bones and rice was the kind of simple, satisfying meal that Black mothers could stretch to feed unexpected Christmas guests without breaking the family budget. Pork or beef neck bones were browned in a heavy pot, then simmered with onions, garlic, and seasonings until the meat became tender enough to fall from the bone. The cooking liquid transformed into a rich gravy, infused with gelatin released from the bones during the long, slow cooking process. Rice was cooked separately, fluffy and white, ready to receive generous portions of the bones and their savory gravy. Some mothers added tomato paste or Worcestershire sauce for depth, while others kept the preparation simple to let the pork flavor shine. Neck bones were among the cheapest cuts available, often priced at less than 20 cents a pound in the 1960s. This dish could feed a table of 8 for under $2, making it essential for families with tight Christmas budgets. Children learned to eat around the bones, finding every scrap of meat. Pig's feet simmered in large pots throughout Black neighborhoods during the Christmas season, their rich, gelatinous texture beloved by those who understood slow cooking. These humble cuts were scrubbed clean, then boiled for hours with onions, garlic, bay leaves, and vinegar until the meat became tender enough to slide from the bone. Some families pickled them in spiced vinegar brine, creating a tangy delicacy that kept for weeks without refrigeration. Others braised them with vegetables until they fell apart into silky, collagen-rich stews. The feet cost almost nothing, often less than 15 cents a pound, yet they provided protein and satisfaction that stretched across multiple meals. Children watched as mothers expertly navigated the small bones, learning that patience could transform the cheapest ingredients into something genuinely delicious. The cooking liquid itself became precious, used to flavor greens or beans throughout the holiday week. Pig's feet represented the ultimate expression of waste-nothing cooking. Turkey wings were the affordable alternative when whole turkeys stretched beyond the family budget, offering rich, dark meat flavor at a fraction of the cost. Black mothers would season these meaty wings generously with salt, pepper, garlic, and paprika before roasting them slowly until the skin turned crispy and the meat became fall-off-the-bone tender. Some smothered them in gravy made from the pan drippings, while others braised them with onions and celery until they practically melted. At around 30 cents a pound in the mid-1960s, turkey wings allowed families to enjoy the taste of Thanksgiving's bird without the expense. The wings provided enough meat to feed several people, especially when served alongside rice or dressing that soaked up the flavorful juices. Children often fought over the crispy wing tips, considering them the best part of the meal. These weren't consolation prizes. They were deliberate choices by mothers who knew that dark meat carried more flavor than the breast meat wealthy families preferred. Black-eyed peas with ham hocks carried meaning that went far beyond nutrition, symbolizing luck and prosperity for the coming year in Black households across the South. The dried peas were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with smoked ham hocks that released their salty, porky essence into the cooking liquid. Onions, garlic, and sometimes a dried hot pepper were added for depth, while the peas slowly softened into creamy legumes surrounded by rich, smoky broth. The ham hocks themselves cost pennies at the butcher counter, often given away as scraps, yet they transformed a simple pot of beans into something extraordinary. Families served these peas on Christmas Day and especially on New Year's Day, believing that eating them would bring good fortune. The dish stretched to feed large gatherings, with mothers adding water to the pot as more relatives arrived unexpectedly. Cornbread was always served alongside, essential for soaking up the flavorful potlikker that many considered the best part of the dish. Giblet gravy was the secret weapon that elevated Christmas dinners from ordinary to extraordinary, made from parts that many modern cooks simply throw away. The giblets, heart, liver, gizzard, and neck, were simmered in water with onion, celery, and herbs until tender, creating a deeply flavored broth. The cooked giblets were then chopped fine and returned to the broth, which was thickened with flour and enriched with pan drippings from the roasted bird. This gravy carried layers of flavor that no store-bought version could match, tasting of careful preparation and inherited knowledge. Black mothers understood that the giblets contained concentrated nutrition and intense savory depth. The gravy was ladled generously over dressing, rice, and sliced meat, tying the entire meal together. Children learned to appreciate the slightly chewy texture of the chopped giblets, understanding that this was how grandmothers had always made Christmas dinner taste like home. Fried corn was summer's sweetness preserved for winter tables, made from kernels that had been cut fresh from the cob and frozen or canned during the harvest months. Black mothers would melt bacon drippings or butter in cast-iron skillets, then add the corn along with a bit of sugar, salt, and pepper, stirring until the natural sugars caramelized slightly. Some versions included diced onions or bell peppers, while others kept the preparation simple to let the corn's sweetness shine through. The dish developed crispy edges where the kernels touched the hot pan, creating textural contrast that elevated simple vegetables into something special. Fried corn cost almost nothing to prepare, especially when made from home-canned vegetables put up during summer abundance. It provided color and brightness to Christmas plates that might otherwise be dominated by browns and greens. This was comfort food in its purest form, unpretentious, satisfying, and deeply connected to the agricultural rhythms that shaped Black Southern life. Red velvet cake was the showpiece dessert that Black mothers saved for Christmas, its dramatic crimson layers making it impossible to ignore on any holiday table. The cake required buttermilk, cocoa, and careful technique to achieve its signature tender crumb, while red food coloring transformed it into something visually stunning. Between each layer and covering the outside went cream cheese frosting, tangy, sweet, and rich enough to balance the subtle chocolate flavor. Some families traced their recipes back generations, with variations that made each version distinctly their own. The ingredients weren't expensive individually, but the cake demanded time and attention that made it feel luxurious. Mothers often baked it the day before Christmas, allowing the flavors to meld and the frosting to set properly. Children gathered to watch the assembly, knowing that this cake represented celebration in its highest form. Red velvet wasn't just dessert. It was edible proof that this day was different from all others. Potato salad appeared at every Black Christmas gathering, its creamy richness providing cool contrast to the hot dishes that dominated the table. Potatoes were boiled until just tender, then cubed and mixed with mayonnaise, mustard, chopped celery, onions, and hard-boiled eggs while still slightly warm so they absorbed the seasonings. Some mothers added sweet pickle relish for brightness, while others preferred dill pickles for tang. The secret was in the balance: enough mayonnaise to bind without becoming soupy, enough mustard to add bite without overwhelming. Every family believed their version was superior, and debates about proper technique could last through entire gatherings. The dish was economical enough to make in large batches, stretching to accommodate unexpected relatives. Potatoes cost only pennies per pound, and eggs were affordable protein that added substance. This wasn't fancy food, but it was essential. No Christmas spread was complete without potato salad made exactly the way grandmother used to make it. Peach cobbler bubbled golden and fragrant in ovens across Black households every Christmas, its sweet fruit filling topped with buttery crust that shattered at the touch of a spoon. The peaches came from jars put up during summer months or from cans purchased affordably at the grocery store, their syrup becoming part of the filling that thickened as it baked. Mothers mixed simple biscuit dough or poured batter over the fruit, creating a topping that puffed and browned in the oven's heat. Cinnamon and nutmeg perfumed the cobbler, while a generous amount of butter enriched every layer. Some families preferred their cobbler with a bottom crust as well, creating a double-crusted version that was more pie than cobbler. Served warm with cold milk poured over, or, for those who could afford it, a scoop of vanilla ice cream, peach cobbler represented summer sunshine captured for winter celebration. The dish cost little to prepare but delivered satisfaction that far exceeded its humble ingredients. Pound cake was the foundational dessert that anchored Black Christmas tables, its dense buttery crumb requiring no frosting or embellishment to prove its worth. The traditional recipe called for a pound each of butter, sugar, flour, and eggs, proportions that created a cake so rich it needed nothing more than powdered sugar. Black mothers creamed the butter and sugar by hand until fluffy, then added eggs one at a time before folding in flour with patience the recipe demanded. Some added vanilla extract, Others preferred lemon zest or almond flavoring to make their version distinctive. The cake baked slowly in tube pans until golden, filling kitchens with an aroma that announced Christmas had arrived. Slices were served plain, toasted with butter, or topped with fruit depending on the occasion. Pound cake kept well for days, improving in flavor as it sat, making it practical as well as delicious. This was legacy baking. Recipes passed through generations of women who measured by feel rather than cups. Chow relish brought brightness and crunch to Christmas plates, heavy with rich meats and creamy sides, its tangy sweet flavor cutting through the richness. This preserved relish was made from late summer vegetables, green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, and peppers, chopped fine and pickled in spiced vinegar with sugar and mustard seeds. Black mothers canned dozens of jars during harvest season, storing them for winter meals when they would add welcome contrast to heavy holiday foods. A spoonful of chow alongside ham, greens, or black-eyed peas transformed each bite, providing the acidic balance that made rich foods more enjoyable. The relish cost almost nothing to make, using vegetables that might otherwise have gone to waste at season's end. Each family's recipe varied slightly. Some preferred sweeter versions, others added more heat. But all agreed that chow was essential. It represented the Southern tradition of putting food by, ensuring that summer's abundance extended through winter's scarcity. Macaroni salad was the cool, creamy side dish that balanced the heat and richness of Christmas dinner, offering something light among the heavy meats and gravies. Elbow macaroni was boiled until just tender, then drained and mixed while warm with mayonnaise, mustard, and finely diced vegetables, usually celery, onions, and bell peppers. Some mothers added hard-boiled eggs or sweet pickle relish, while others kept the preparation simple and let the pasta absorb the tangy dressing. The salad needed time to chill, allowing flavors to meld together into something greater than the individual ingredients. At just pennies for a box of pasta and a jar of mayonnaise, macaroni salad could feed a crowd without straining the holiday budget. It was practical food that traveled well to church gatherings and family reunions, holding up for hours on buffet tables. Children often preferred it to more intensely flavored dishes, making it essential for keeping young ones fed and happy during long holiday meals. Crackling bread carried the rich, porky crunch of rendered pork skin folded right into the cornbread batter, elevating an everyday staple into something special. When hogs were butchered, the skin was rendered for lard, leaving behind crispy cracklings that resourceful cooks refused to waste. These golden bits were stirred into cornmeal batter with buttermilk and eggs, then baked in cast-iron skillets until the bread developed a crusty bottom and tender interior. Each bite delivered the satisfying crunch of the cracklings against the soft, slightly sweet cornbread. This bread cost nothing extra to make. The cracklings were a byproduct of lard rendering that would have otherwise been discarded. Families passed down the technique of getting the crackling distribution just right, ensuring every slice contained its share. Served warm alongside greens, beans, or Christmas dinner meats, crackling bread represented the ingenuity that turned every scrap into sustenance and celebration. Fried chicken appeared on Christmas tables as the beloved centerpiece when ham or turkey exceeded the family budget, its golden crust and juicy meat rivaling any expensive roast. Black mothers soaked chicken pieces in buttermilk overnight, tenderizing the meat and ensuring the seasoned flour coating would cling perfectly. The chicken was dredged in flour mixed with salt, pepper, and sometimes paprika, then fried in cast-iron skillets filled with hot lard or shortening. The crackling crust shattered at first bite, giving way to succulent meat that had been cooked to perfection through generations of practice. A whole chicken cost less than $2 in the 1960s, making it an affordable way to create a feast that felt genuinely special. The aroma of frying chicken announced celebration throughout the neighborhood, drawing children to the kitchen to watch and wait. Leftover pieces were treasured for Christmas night sandwiches or eaten cold the next morning. Butter beans simmered in pots throughout Black households during Christmas, their creamy texture and mild flavor providing comfort that complemented bolder dishes on the table. These large lima beans were cooked slowly with ham hocks, salt pork, or bacon until they became tender and the cooking liquid thickened into rich, starchy broth. Onions and garlic added depth, while salt and pepper brought the flavors into balance. The beans were inexpensive. Dried butter beans cost only cents per pound and swelled to feed large families from a single bag. Some mothers mashed a portion of the beans to thicken the potlikker naturally, while others left them whole for a cleaner presentation. The dish required patience but little active attention, simmering on back burners while other preparations took priority. Butter beans represented the kind of practical, filling food that ensured no one left the holiday table hungry, no matter how many unexpected guests appeared. Pickled beets added brilliant color and tangy sweetness to Christmas plates, their deep purple hue contrasting beautifully with the browns and greens of other dishes. Black mothers canned these beets during summer harvest, slicing them thin and packing them in jars with spiced vinegar, sugar, and cloves. The beets mellowed during months of storage, their earthiness balanced by the sweet, sour brine that turned almost syrupy. A few slices on the plate provided palate-cleansing acidity that refreshed the mouth between bites of rich meats and creamy sides. The cost was negligible. Beets grew easily in gardens, and pickling ingredients were pantry staples. Children sometimes resisted their strong flavor, but elders considered them essential to a proper Christmas spread. The purple juice that bled across the plate was either loved or dreaded, depending on family preference. Pickled beets connected the holiday table to summer's abundance and the careful work of preservation. Ambrosia salad was the special occasion fruit dish that made Christmas feel different from ordinary Sundays, its sweet creaminess delighting children and adults alike. Canned mandarin oranges, pineapple chunks, and shredded coconut were folded together with miniature marshmallows and sour cream or whipped topping. Some families added maraschino cherries for pops of red color, while others stirred in chopped pecans for satisfying crunch. The salad needed to chill overnight so the marshmallows softened and the flavors melted together into something magical. It straddled the line between side dish and dessert, appearing alongside the main meal but sweet enough to satisfy sugar cravings. Canned fruit was affordable year-round, making this dish accessible to families who couldn't afford fresh tropical ingredients. The name itself suggested something heavenly, and children often considered it the very best part of Christmas dinner. Hot water cornbread was the quick, crispy alternative when there wasn't time for baking, fried in small cakes that emerged golden and crunchy from the skillet. Cornmeal was mixed with boiling water, salt, and a bit of sugar, then formed into small patties by hand and dropped into hot oil or bacon drippings. The cakes puffed slightly as they fried, developing crispy exteriors that crackled between teeth, while the inside stayed dense and corny. This bread required no eggs, no buttermilk, no rising time, just cornmeal, water, and heat. Black mothers could produce a batch in minutes, making it practical for Christmas mornings when the oven was occupied with other dishes. The cost was essentially nothing, just cornmeal that most households kept stocked throughout the year. Children loved grabbing hot cakes straight from the draining paper, eating them plain or with butter melting into every crevice. Chitlin loaf transformed the beloved Christmas delicacy into something more approachable for those who found whole chitlins challenging to eat. Cleaned chitlins were chopped fine, mixed with cornmeal, eggs, onions, and seasonings, then baked in loaf pans until firm and sliceable. The result was milder than traditional boiled chitlins, with cornmeal providing texture and baking eliminating much of the pungent aroma that sometimes overwhelmed. Sliced and served warm, the loaf could be eaten with hot sauce or gravy, offering the distinctive flavor in a more familiar format. This preparation stretched holiday protein further, with cornmeal adding bulk at minimal cost. Families who loved chitlins appreciated having another way to prepare them, while hesitant eaters often found the loaf more palatable. The dish showed how Black cooks constantly innovated, finding new ways to present traditional ingredients while honoring heritage. Rice and gravy was the foundation that stretched every Christmas meat dish further, providing a neutral base that absorbed and showcased the flavors of whatever protein the family could afford. Long-grain rice was cooked until fluffy and white, then mounded on plates to receive ladlefuls of gravy made from ham, turkey, chicken, or pork drippings. The gravy was simple: pan drippings thickened with flour and seasoned with salt and pepper, but it carried the concentrated essence of the roasted meat. Rice cost only pennies per serving and could be made in large quantities without much effort or attention. This humble combination ensured that even when meat portions were scarce, everyone left the table feeling genuinely satisfied. Children who were picky about vegetables often cleaned their plates when rice and gravy was offered. The dish represented practical wisdom passed through generations of Black families. Tea cakes appeared on Christmas cookie trays as simple, buttery treats that connected Black families to generations of holiday baking traditions. These weren't fancy cookies, just flour, butter, sugar, eggs, and vanilla mixed into tender dough that was rolled and cut into rounds. Some families pressed fork tines across the tops for decoration, while others left them plain or dusted them with sugar before baking. The cookies emerged from the oven pale gold and soft, with a crumb that melted on the tongue with each satisfying bite. Tea cakes kept well in tins, making them practical for the busy holiday season when visitors might drop by unexpectedly. Grandmothers often made them by feel rather than recipe, measuring ingredients by eye and methods learned from their own mothers and grandmothers. Tea cakes carried memory in every bite, connecting Christmas tables to all the holidays that came before them. Sweet potato pie was the deeply rooted reunion dessert tied to gardens, home kitchens, and family wisdom passed down through generations. Grandmothers roasted sweet potatoes until their skins loosened and the flesh turned soft and sweet, then mashed them with milk sugar eggs and warm spices until the filling glowed a deep orange. Poured into a homemade crust and baked slowly, the pie set into a silky custard that carried the taste of memory in every bite. Its aroma filled kitchens with the scent of nutmeg, cinnamon, and roasted sweetness, reminding everyone of holidays, harvests, and the hands that taught them how to cook. At reunions, sweet potato pie stood proudly beside every cake, cobbler, and pudding because it represented history, home, and identity. One slice held the softness of family stories and the strength of those who baked it long before modern recipes existed. Peanut soup had deep roots in West African cooking and carried over into the kitchens of Black America during times of scarcity. Families would boil peanuts until soft, grind them into a paste, and whisk them into broth with onions and seasonings. The result was a creamy, nutty soup that filled stomachs without relying on expensive meat. Because peanuts were widely available and inexpensive, this dish became a dependable source of protein and comfort. It could be served plain with bread or thickened with vegetables to stretch even further. Children grew up tasting peanut soup as a warm, sustaining dish that soothed hunger while carrying the echo of older traditions. The flavor was earthy and satisfying, reminding families of both resilience and cultural roots. Peanut soup showed that the most affordable ingredients could still produce something memorable, sustaining entire households during difficult seasons. It was not just soup, it was survival food with heritage poured into every bowl. Stewed rutabagas were a staple in southern kitchens during lean years, a root vegetable that could be boiled down and flavored with pork fat for depth. Rutabagas were cheap, stored well through the winter, and filled in for potatoes when those were too expensive or scarce. Families would peel, chop, and simmer them until tender, often serving them alongside beans or cornbread to complete a meal. The dish was hearty without being costly, and it carried a slightly sweet, earthy flavor that grew familiar to children who had little else on their plates. Pork fat or drippings were often added to give richness, turning the humble root into something more comforting. Stewed rutabagas became a dish tied to survival, reflecting both garden ingenuity and frugality. They were not glamorous, but they were dependable, and that mattered most. For many families, a pot of rutabagas simmering on the stove was the scent of perseverance. They represented sustenance and simplicity in the hardest of times. Blackberry molasses cobbler was a sticky, smoky dessert that belonged to cast-iron skillets and long summer nights. The berries were gathered wild from fence lines and hedges, their juice staining fingers and laughter alike. Mixed with thick, dark molasses and a handful of sugar, they turned into a bubbling, fragrant filling. The crust was poured over top, sometimes biscuit dough, sometimes batter, and baked until the edges burned just enough to taste like smoke. It was messy and imperfect, but that was part of its beauty. The syrup thickened into a glossy black glaze that clung to every bite, sweet with a whisper of bitterness. People spooned it hot into bowls, sometimes with milk or cream, but it never needed help. Blackberry molasses cobbler tasted like work and reward, like something earned under the sun. It was the dessert that reminded families that sweetness could survive the hardest days, that joy could bubble up even from thorns. Blackberry cobbler was the reunion favorite made from berries that came straight from backyards, fence lines, or summer fields where children stained their fingers purple, gathering enough fruit to fill a pot. The berries cooked down with sugar until they released their deep purple juices, filling the kitchen with a smell that drifted like warm, sweet air across the entire gathering. The crust was dropped in thick spoonfuls or spread across the top, depending on family tradition, and it baked into a golden blanket that cracked open to reveal bubbling fruit beneath. Each scoop held sweet tart berries wrapped in soft dough, and every bowl stained lips and spoons with the color of summer. Blackberry cobbler tasted like hot afternoon's laughter and the pride of bringing something homegrown to the reunion table. It was the dessert that vanished quickly because everyone wanted a taste of the season captured in a single dish. Stewed oxtails with rice gravy brought deep flavor and slow-cooked richness to Sunday tables across many African American communities. Oxtails, once inexpensive and overlooked, were browned in heavy pots and then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and spices until the meat turned buttery soft. The braising liquid thickened into a silky gravy that clung to each grain of rice, creating a dish that was equal parts comfort and celebration. Families saved this meal for weekends when everyone could gather because patience was essential and conversation flowed while the pot worked its magic. Children sneaked tastes from wooden spoons, drawn by the savory aroma that filled the house from morning until evening. The humble tale, once discarded by butchers, became a centerpiece of pride and ingenuity. Today, rising prices and faster cooking habits mean fewer people take the time to coax such tenderness from a simple cut of beef, but those who remember the meal speak of it as a perfect union of thrift, skill, and the slow rhythm of family life. Pumpkin stew with onions was the kind of dish that proved homegrown vegetables could anchor a meal. Pumpkins were easy to plant, easy to store, and yielded enough flesh to keep a family fed for weeks. My grandmother peeled chunks of pumpkin, cooked them down with onions, and let the pot simmer until it turned thick and savory. The sweetness of the pumpkin mixed with the sharpness of onion, creating a balance that felt hearty and satisfying. Sometimes she added a little pepper or a leftover bone for extra flavor, but even plain, the stew was filling. Served with bread or cornbread, it was enough to feed a household without meat or costly ingredients. In the 1960s, pumpkins were not just for pies or holidays, they were staples, pulled from backyard gardens and turned into supper. The stew carried warmth, thrift, and creativity in every spoonful. Pumpkin stew with onions showed that survival did not mean going without taste, only learning to love what the land gave freely. Wild rice pudding combined indigenous grains with African-inspired preparation to create a dish both nourishing and subtly sweet. Wild rice grew naturally in shallow lakes and slow rivers, and enslaved families near these wetlands harvested the dark grains with paddles and baskets, drying them in the sun for year-round use. Cooked slowly in water until tender, the rice was stirred with a bit of sorghum syrup or honey if available, making a warm pudding that supplied protein and lasting energy. Its nutty flavor and satisfying texture turned a simple bowl into a special treat, especially when fresh fruit or spices could be added. This recipe carried forward after emancipation as African American cooks continued to value wild rice for festive meals and family gatherings. Modern chefs still celebrate its earthy richness, but the story behind wild rice pudding honors the blend of native and African foodways that sustained people through scarcity and created a dessert that is at once humble and deeply rooted in the shared history of America's wetlands and kitchens. Corn husk tamales in the Delta carried a story of adaptation and resilience, blending African American creativity with Mexican influence. Families filled corn husks with seasoned cornmeal dough and sometimes small bits of pork or vegetables, then simmered them slowly until firm. They were portable, hearty, and could stretch a handful of ingredients into meals for many. In the Delta, these tamales became a community staple, often sold from wagons or small kitchens to neighbors who could not afford restaurant food. Wrapped in corn husks, they represented thrift and tradition, proof that families could borrow from other foodways and make it their own. Tamales were often shared at gatherings or passed around during long workdays, feeding both body and spirit. They carried the memory of cornfields and the smell of simmering pots, becoming part of African American culinary history. Delta tamales showed that even in hard times, food could carry flavor, heritage, and strength into the lives of those who needed it most. Hominy crackle porridge was the kind of breakfast that came from patience, not plenty. When there was no bacon, no biscuits, and not much else in the pantry, leftover hominy saved the day. It was stirred into a pot with water or milk, sweetened with molasses, and spiced with nutmeg or cinnamon if you had it. The sound of the spoon scraping against the pot made a rhythm that felt almost like music, slow and steady like morning itself. When the porridge bubbled, it released a scent both earthy and rich, a blend of smoke, sugar, and warmth. Children would sit waiting with chipped bowls in their hands, ready for the first ladle. It was thick and creamy, sometimes with a thin golden crust if it sat long enough. Hominy crackle porridge filled bellies and lifted moods, turning scraps into something special. It reminded families that sweetness did not depend on sugar alone, but on love and endurance. Every spoonful was a story of thrift and tenderness, made from what was left and shared without complaint. When the bowl was empty, people still felt full, not just from the food, but from the comfort it brought to a hard world made softer by care. Red velvet cake with cream cheese frosting was the showstopper that signaled a celebration long before anyone sliced into the deep red layers shimmering under thick white frosting. The batter mixed into a smooth, vibrant red color that felt dramatic and festive as it poured into pans waiting to bake into soft, tender layers that held moisture like a secret. Once cooled, each layer was stacked carefully with generous spreads of cream cheese frosting, smooth, rich, and tangy enough to balance the sweetness of the cake. At reunions, this cake never blended into the background because its color stood bold against every other dessert, drawing eyes and calling people forward even before the meal was finished. Elders sliced it with pride, remembering holidays, anniversaries, and Sundays when red velvet marked something important. The flavor was warm, gentle, and comforting with a subtle cocoa note that made every bite feel familiar, even for those tasting it. For the first time, red velvet cake was a symbol of family joy, tradition, and the belief that reunions deserved a dessert that felt truly special. Peach preserves with biscuits brought the sweetness of summer into the cold months of winter. Families would boil down ripe peaches with sugar until thick, sealing them in jars to last through the year. Spread over hot biscuits, the preserves offered both comfort and nourishment when fresh fruit was long gone. Canning peaches was a yearly ritual, tying families to the cycles of the land and the rhythm of harvest. It required time and patience, but the reward was sweetness that carried through the hardest seasons. Biscuits were a perfect partner, soft, warm, and filling, making peach preserves a special treat that brightened tables. For children, it was a taste of abundance in months of scarcity, a reminder that summer fruit could still be enjoyed when snow or frost covered the fields. Peach preserves with biscuits were both practical and emotional, offering joy from jars of hard work. They carried hope through cold winters. Soot biscuits were the kind of food you learned to trust when the fire was all you had. They were baked in soot-covered Dutch ovens, set right into the coals until the smell of toasted flour filled the air. The outsides came out black and charred, but inside they were soft, warm, and sweet from the faint taste of smoke. You brushed off the ash and split them open, steam rising like a small blessing. They were eaten with syrup, molasses, or even gravy if the morning allowed it. Families traveling, camping, or working the land knew this trick well. It was food that came straight from the earth and fire, raw and honest. Soot biscuits did not look like much, but they carried pride. They were proof that comfort could come from the simplest effort, that even ashes could feed the body and soothe the soul. The smell lingered on your hands and clothes, a reminder that good things sometimes came wrapped in smoke. Each bite tasted like work and gratitude, the flavor of survival baked in real flame. Bay leaf infusion offered warmth and gentle comfort, using one of the few aromatic plants that grew wild near plantation quarters. Fresh or dried bay leaves were gathered from native bay trees and steeped in hot water to create a soothing tea with a light floral scent and mild medicinal qualities. This infusion was believed to aid digestion and ease colds, and it provided a calming moment during hard days. The knowledge of bay's healing properties came from both African herbal traditions and local indigenous practices, merging into a shared understanding of the land's quiet gifts. Even after emancipation, African American communities continued to brew bay tea for health and hospitality, and its subtle fragrance remains a hallmark of Southern kitchens where bay leaves still flavor soups and stews. Bay leaf infusion stands as a gentle reminder that survival was not only about calories but also about care, showing how enslaved people drew strength and solace from the natural world around them. Which forgotten Christmas dish would you bring back to your holiday table? Drop your memories in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss another trip down memory lane with us.